Hello, everyone. I'd like to get started if we can. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so glad to see such a great turnout. My name is Paul Roth. I'm the director here at the Image Center. And on behalf of the IMC, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight for the latest talk in our Howard and Carol Tanenbaum lecture series with our guest speaker, Nathalie Herschdorfer. We're presenting Nathalie's lecture, which is called Deborah Turbeville Beyond Fashion, in conjunction with the Image Center's latest exhibition, which is called Otherworldly, Deborah Turbeville Photographs. This exhibition is on view now in our galleries and was organized by our collections curator, Denise Burkhofer. Before we begin, I want to mention that this event is happening in front of a live audience here at Toronto Metropolitan University. And I want to thank the School of Image Arts for sharing their theater with us. We're located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee peoples, and we embrace our shared and ongoing responsibility for the land where this university stands. I want to start tonight by speaking a bit about the historic context for this lecture series, which is, by a long shot, our longest-lived and most important program for audiences interested in photography here in Toronto. While the Tanenbaum Lecture Series has had a number of names since it began, it was sponsored initially by Kodak Canada, and it's been in operation since 1986. For many years, it was famously known as the Kodak Lecture Series. And through the years, nearly 250 photographers, filmmakers, media artists, photo historians, and curators have addressed Toronto audiences, including the very first speaker, W. Eugene Smith, and an extraordinary array of presenters since then. Far too many to mention, but just to give you a sampling, that group includes Berenice Abbott, Dawood Bey, Stan Brakhage, Robert Frank, Susan Meiselas, Eli Reed, Michael Snow, and many, many more. When the Image Center opened its doors in 2012, we wanted to continue this acclaimed series. So we inherited it from the School of Image Arts. They were gracious enough to pass it on. And this endeavor of continuing the lecture series was made possible by a generous gift from Howard and Carol Tanenbaum in 2014. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank Howard and Carol for their very generous support of not only the lecture series, but for many other aspects of what we do here at the IMC. We're very happy to have Howard here with us tonight. So thank you very much, Howard. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for this exhibition season, namely the Toronto Star and Blog TO, as well as the Ontario Arts Council, which supports our operations in general. We're very pleased to have their support for our exhibitions and our other programs. And I also want to note that our exhibition is entirely drawn from our own collection of photographs by Deborah Turbeville, and all of the photographs in this collection were donated by Eric Berthold and Paul Sinclair. And we are very grateful to them for entrusting us with these photographs. I'm happy to say that Paul Sinclair is here with us tonight. Thank you so much to you and to Eric, Paul. And finally, I do want to also thank our partners at the Muse Foundation. They are the guardians of Deborah Turbeville's archive today, and they have been incredibly generous, giving us support in every way you can imagine so that we can be part of their project, which is promoting the legacy of this great artist. We're very grateful to our colleagues Richard Grossbard and Amanda Smith, both of who are here tonight. Thank you very much for trusting us. A couple of notes before we begin. We're recording tonight's program, and we will be uploading a video of this talk to our YouTube channel in the near future. For those who aren't able to attend tonight and those who want to see it see it again after seeing it in person. After the discussion tonight, we will have a Q&A session and we'll be taking questions for Nathalie from the audience. So if you do have a question, please wait until we bring you a microphone. And the reason for this is that we want your question to be heard by everybody here and also by the audience on YouTube. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Nathalie Herschdorfer. Nathalie is a curator and art historian specializing in the history of photography. She is presently the director of the museum Photo Elysée in Lausanne, Switzerland. And before that, as director of the Museum of Fine Arts, Le Locle, Nathalie organized numerous shows of both historical and contemporary photography in her long career, featuring the work of such photographers and artists as Henri Cartier-Bresson, Stanley Kubrick, Vic Muniz, Alex Prager, Vivienne Sassen, Hiroshi Sugimoto, and many, many others. Nathalie is a widely respected curator and photo historian and has worked internationally in all kinds of venues. I do want to note that she partnered on several projects through the years with the great photography curator William Ewing, who was born and got his start here in Canada. And Nathalie teaches the history of photography as well at the Lausanne University of Arts and Design, and she's authored several books, including Body, the photography book, in 2019, the Thames and Hudson Dictionary of Photography in 2018, Coming in Fashion, A Century of Photography at Condé Nast in 2012, my favorite of her books, and Afterwards, Contemporary Photography Confronting the Past in 2011. In this lecture, Nathalie will share insights from her most recent publication, which is this one, Deborah Turbeville Photocollage, which accompanied her exhibition of the same name at Photo Elysée, which closed there recently and is now on view at Huis Marseille in Amsterdam, which is a great venue. And I believe that this show will travel further. Nathalie's book offers a new assessment of Turbeville's considerable and heretofore under-examined contribution to the history of photography. Over a career spanning 40 years, Deborah Turbeville developed a unique visual style, creating narrative photographs and collages that evoked her inner world. She operated, I think as most people know her work, in the fashion and editorial magazine world, and is well known for her practice in the fashion arena. But she is increasingly understood as a photographic artist, a great bookmaker, a very innovative collagist, and always as an experimentalist, interested in the ability of photography as a medium to convey meaning through material and atmosphere in a variety of ways. We are so happy to have Nathalie Herschdorfer here to the Image Center and to Toronto to speak to you all about Deborah Turbeville. Nathalie?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm very glad, and thank you for the entire team at the Image Center for hosting this event and also tomorrow's event. Today, I'm going to bring you into my way of thinking about the work of Deborah Turbeville. I wanted to share with you not so much about her life, because I know that in the room there are many people who knew, some people knew Deborah in person. I never met her, but I really want to share the way I navigate, I would say, in photography, to tell you a little bit more about my work as a curator and a historian, and to explain about my approach of how I wanted to bring Deborah Turbeville's work in history of art. So this is a kind of personal journey I want to discuss today. First of all, I also want to apologize for my English, speak French, and I hope you can follow me tonight. I'm going to start with a few installation views of my museum in Switzerland. I'm here with Pau Maynes, my colleague, who came also from Lausanne. We just hosted this exhibition. I show you a few installation views so you can see. And also it was interesting for us to discover today your exhibition here of Deborah's work. Tonight I want to explain how we come to this result. To host an exhibition in a photography museum, how can we do that work and make a selection of work and what kind of story we want to tell to our visitors. So first of all, I want to introduce Photo Elysée, our museum. This is the building, brand new building in Lausanne, Switzerland, in the French part of Switzerland, and the building was built 2 years ago. So we share the building with a design museum, and our neighbor is a museum of fine arts. The museum has a very important collection in photography, covering the entire history of photography. We don't focus on one kind of photography, but we try really to go over the history of the medium. I show you a few installation views. So we go to very contemporary installation, or here a video installation, but also, of course, also historical material. As you just heard, before being the director of this museum, I was a director of a museum of fine arts in Switzerland, but photography being my specialty, I always brought photography in my exhibitions. And of course, I always have to think about audience. And depending on the museum where I work, it's very important for me to understand who are the people I'm talking to. So here, Hiroshi Sugimoto, the great Japanese photographer, or Todd Hido, photographer from San Francisco, very different kind of photography, but I show you a few installation views of a previous exhibition I had in the museum. Or here it was a private collection from a collection, Italian collection. It was really a show about history of photography, or more recently, I also hosted this exhibition that was traveling from New York, the new Black Vanguard, dedicated to the new generation of Black photographers. Or here, something very historical, Gary Winogrand exhibition. I also show you how I installed shows in the museum, or he's Stanley Kubrick, just to say that working as a curator is not only making a selection of works for the wall, but it's also thinking about how to present them, how to create an atmosphere, and what kind of atmosphere we want to create, depending on the kind of images. And it's true that in the past, I have worked quite a lot with fashion photographer, what we call fashion photography. Here is Vivian Sassen, the well-known Dutch photographer. Here, another photographer also working in fashion, Eric Madigan Heck. I gave him his first museum show. Or he's someone who is not really fashion photographer, but also work for fashion, Alex Prager from Los Angeles. But I also have an interest in looking at what very young people, students in photography do, and this is a project made by photography students with Jean-Paul Gaultier. And for me, it's also interesting to discuss with this new generation about how we can install an exhibition, because, of course, looking at exhibitions, it's not at all the same experience of looking at a screen. Some 10 years ago or 12 years ago, I had really the privilege to dig into an archive, Condé Nast archive. Condé Nast is the publishing house of Vogue magazine. This is international. This is based, of course, in New York, because Vogue was founded in New York in 1896. But it's also in London, it's also in New York, it's also in Milan and all over the world. And I was the first curator outside Condé Nast to get access to the entire archives. The Condé Nast archive is 7 million images. So of course I wasn't able to go all over that, and I didn't want, but I just opened boxes randomly first, And it was a way to dig into this very large history. And then the show that was 100 years of photography, of mostly fashion photography. So photography published in Condé Nast magazines. And the exhibition traveled quite a lot in the world. Here it is in Tokyo, this is Paris. And most recently, I continued working in this kind of group shows about fashion photography. And this was a show that you can see here was held in Hong Kong, bringing 30 contemporary photographers, also working with fashion photography. And why I'm telling you all this past I had with fashion photography, this is because I consider that fashion photography can sometimes be much more than just fashion. And my point, I'm not a fashion specialist, and my background in history of art or history of photography is that to look at images and to think about how images can sometimes be more than what we think. Usually we like also in history of art, history of photography, to put images in a box. We try to think about, oh, this is a photojournalism, or this is art, or this is fashion. But sometimes some of these images, and this is the case for Deborah Turbeville, are much something else, are also something else. So how did I approach this work? Of Deborah Turbeville, I have to say that it was a privilege for me to be able to access the entire archives, thanks to Richard Grossbart here, who brought me to the Muse collection, and I worked closely with Amanda Smith, from the head of the archives at the Muse collection in New Jersey. And it's a real privilege to be able to go through an archives just being completely free, independent, and not expecting something specific. Of course, I knew Deborah Turbeville's name. I like to say that I was in touch with her when I did my research about Condé Nast. I wanted her represented in this group show, so I contacted her at that time and asked permission to reproduce and to show the work, but I never met her. And honestly, when I started to look at the work, I didn't want to be too limited in the way I wanted to look, and I was thinking that I should just keep my eyes open and my ideas open and not try to limit about something that I would know about her. Because of course, when you study history, when you look at works, you are influenced by all the books you read, all the articles you read, or all everything that people can tell you. But it's a privilege to be able to be in an archive and just look randomly as well. Of course, today, our work as a curators is very much also about what we can see on screens and what we see on internet. The work we do has really changed since the 21st century. The number of images that we see every day is like expanding. This flux is expanding, and also for us as curators, and of course also for me, it's not just about digging in, boxes of prints, which is really something beautiful, but we also look more and more of images online, and these images, of course, they have an influence of the way we consider also history of photography. that since, the social media, since Facebook or Instagram, we look at all these images, we know that professional photographers are not needed anymore. Anyone can just make a picture, post a picture. You don't even need a model. You can just photograph yourself. Selfie is a word that is part of the dictionary today. And even, stars like Kim Kardashian, they don't even need photographers anymore. And they can just create their own, celebrity page just online. And without, having magazines, having professional photographers. And it is true that for a long time we are exposed to photography everywhere. In the street, of course, this is something that, it's always there. But if you go back to history of photography, it was always the case with, postcards. That was, this way for everyone to get access to cheap photography and really to share photography with other people. Books, of course. Our museum has a beautiful collection of photography books, and this is a history of itself, and I consider photography books as important as prints. And of course, it's also interesting to see that we photography specialists are, I guess, the collectors of photography books. Like photographers are the most collectors of photography books, but it is really a tradition and something really important. And if you think about history, it goes back to the very early days of photography, because one of the, inventors of photography, what he did was a book. If I go back to William Henry Fox Talbot. It's not only books, postcards, posters in the street, it's also newspapers. It's also all these printed pages that you see over and over, even though today these printed pages are more and more things that you see online. And this kind of photography, and I also work a lot about not just fashion photography, but also the news photography. For me, it's also interesting to see how we treat photography, how sometimes an image is reproduced again and again, and why do we choose same images. Here it is from Paris, 2015, after Charlie Hebdo attack. And also as a historian of photography, for me, it's also interesting to think about where these images that we first see, where are they from? And if you think about this one that was, on the cover of all the newspapers, and I was thinking, and suddenly there's a history also of these symbolic images, like here, September 2001, September 11. If you go back to history of the Second World War, another very well-known image with flag, another one that you all know, of course, 1945. But if you go back to history of paintings, of course, you have again and again the same kind of construction of images that are, very part of our culture. So I really consider that the photography I see most of the time, belong to this large history of art, of images. And most of the images that we keep in mind that are appealing, I realize that there are some repetitive motives. When, I'm just going outside the fashion photography, but just to show you an example, when we were looking at all these images coming from Ukraine, of course, first of all, we saw all these images, of people fleeing. And I was thinking about also important images made during Second World War of people fleeing, or this one that you all saw, I'm sure, in the news in Ukraine, in this hospital, this woman giving almost birth. I was thinking of this image that I found in the Red Cross archive. That's another archive that I studied. And of course, this tradition of looking at images is not something new, not something that we have today, but it has also a long history. And here, this is First World War, how we already used photography to show images. So let's now start thinking more about fashion photography. And of course, if you think about the work of a fashion photographer, you have to think about the quantity, I mean, the number of images that were published over the years in magazines. It's like endless. And also for me, what is interesting, if you think about all these printed images, these images are not meant to last. They are replaced every month, every week. You buy a magazine, or you used to buy a magazine, and today it's even shorter because you see an image online and you just forget instantly. But these magazines at that time, when it was printed on paper, you wouldn't keep them. It was a way to, always show something new, and then to be replaced. So I was telling you about American Vogue. So 1892, that's the very first issue. And for me, it's important to go back to that history, even when I was thinking about Deborah Turbeville, because she worked, and I will tell you a little bit more about that, she worked for this magazine when she started in 1975. It's very interesting to think that this magazine, and I show you here a few images of the first covers, they really paid attention and wanted to create an imagery, very beautiful imagery, and you can see these are the covers where they hired illustrators, fashion illustrators, and they put a lot of care in, making these illustrations. So, of course, at that time, photography existed, but as they wanted to have beautiful covers in color, they used drawings. This idea of having fashion imagery for everyone to look at is also a long tradition. And Mercure Galland was one of the first, I would say, fashion magazine in France. Here, Mercure Galland started in 1672. So this idea of showing fashion to people, bringing fashion through images to people, started a long time ago and much longer before photography. Here, it's another journal that is also quite important for fashion, Journal des Dames et des Modes, started in the 18th century, late 18th century, where you would have illustrations. It's before the time of photography. You would have illustration just to give an idea about fashionable, way of having hair or garment. So when I was thinking about Deborah Turbeville, and of course, she, as a fashion photographer, she worked a lot for magazines. She did some cover images. So of course, I had this long history in mind of all these photographers who worked in these magazines. And I show you here again a few of these covers. I had to go back to history of photography in fashion, and this is the first cover in color, first photography cover in color for Vogue in 1932. So to go back before that, you can see the care about illustration, what I just said. But photography started in magazines in the early 20th century with here Baron de Meyer, and you can see that it's much more just than an illustration about a dress. It is already an atmosphere. It is a stage. It is about light. It is about pose. Fashion photography was always a stage. here, it's not fashion photography per se. It's a work by Edward Steichen, who was a photographer who, in the early days of 1900, worked in New York and was able to photograph some important people in New York. But the way that he made this portrait, for me, it's very important because Edward Steichen became one of the very first fashion photographers. Edward Steichen, to go back to stay a little bit with him, wanted to be a painter. He was also a painter, and when he started to make photography, he was really playing, experimenting with photography, experimenting also with the printing. We are here in 1904. These are the days of pictorialism. And of course, it was really about bringing photography to something that goes much beyond documentation, but creating images, making images, playing with the printing processes. So here you see Edward Steichen it's a self-portrait. It's funny because it is part of history of photography. This is a photography, but what you can see as a self-portrait is him as a painter. So interesting to see that painting, being an artist meant at that time being a painter. And Edward Steichen was very much involved in this artistic group in the early days of the 20th century. His studio at that time was in New York, in what was also 291 Gallery, that was founded by Alfred Stieglitz, and it was previously where Edward Steichen lived. He was very much involved also in this gallery, who brought modern art in New York. And he was, of course, thinking about art. He was really very much influenced by many artists. As an American, he went to Paris. He wanted to meet Rodin, which he did. And here you can see this is a kind of montage of several prints together, where he has the portrait of Rodin in profile and the Penseur, and behind a sculpture, a marble. This is also Edward Steichen, playing with portraiture, or here also making a beautiful portrait called Cyclamen. But Edward Steichen, as a photographer, also had all these references in art. So when he came to nude, or to the female body, of course, he also played with poses. Here you can see again that history of photography has history of paintings also as a kind of tradition. So even in the 19th century, photographers who came to, the people who came to photography had history of paintings in mind. Photography was also portraiture, of course, but it was also this idea of celebrities. And this is exactly what you can find in fashion photography. And that's why I'm showing these images today, because, having people posing, know how to pose. Actresses knew how to pose for a camera, and this was already the case in the 19th century when photographers had to bring these celebrities in front of the camera. And to go back to Edward Steichen, and he was, I think, crucial also in the way fashion photography really started to play. This is 1911, and this is a photograph he made for Paul Poiret, the famous stylist, couturier in Paris. So it was a commission for Art et Décoration, a journal, and it was, we can say, or Edward Steichen said himself, that it was kind of part of the very early days of fashion photography in this style of pictorialism. But for me, looking at these images today, very interesting thinking again about Deborah Turbeville. And I really think that for her, go back to this period of history of photography or history of fashion photography, even though maybe it was unconscious, was very part of something that she would be receptive. Here again, the early days of fashion photography, again, I go back to Baron de Meyer, who was the first employee as a photographer for Vogue before heading to Harper's Bazaar. Other photographers at that time, but what I wanted to say, to go back to Edward Steichen, Edward Steichen started to work as a fashion photographer in 1923. Here you see him around that period. So as I said, he wanted to be a painter, and he tried to be a painter, but he never succeeded, and he was never able to make money with paintings. So during First World War, for the American Army, because he was a photographer, that's what he did. But he was looking for a job, and he met in New York Mr. Condé Nast. There's a Mr. Condé Nast, the owner of Vogue magazine, of Vanity Fair. And what was interesting for me, and that's why I want to tell you about that history, is that Mr. Condé Nast, he hired artists. He wanted to have the best image makers for his magazine. And he really launched a tradition with that. And these are the words he told Edward Steichen at the time. Make Vogue a Louvre. It means that a magazine can be art, and the images that are reproduced in a magazine can be art. And I really think that it resonates with what we think today about Deborah Turbeville. So I show you a few of images that Edward Steichen made. And what was interesting that he first, Mr. Condé Nast told Edward Steichen, if you don't want to have your name as an artist, reproduced next to your images, that's fine. We don't need to put your name because we understand that you want to be recognized as an artist. But Edward Steichen said, no, at the opposite. I'm very proud to sign my pictures, and I want my name next to them because I really think that with photography reproduced in a magazine, and we are in the 1920s, so it's really modern, I can really reach many people, and that's what I want. So I will make the best of my work. So I show you a few of these images, but of course I'm sure you know this one, beautiful portrait of Gloria Swanson. And of course, he also went outdoor and created these different images. So I go a bit fast here because I just wanted to show you a little bit about history of fashion photography, playing with light, playing with shadows, and the different models. Just as a note here, also important not to forget when we think about history of fashion photography, Mr. Condé Nast, against him, had this brilliant idea to bring actresses in the magazine, not just because they were actresses or comedians, but also because they knew how to pose. They knew how to act in front of a camera because they knew how to act on a stage. So working with actresses, working with people who want to be on a stage or in front of the camera for a film, like silent films, or later Gloria Swanson, or later for just Hollywood films, it was something very important in fashion photography, and it explains why many fashion photographers also worked with actresses. And if you go to today, of course, we still like to use these actresses to sell fashion or beauty. What is also important at that time, and that's why I say a bit about this history of fashion photography, this is the early days of advertisements and using photographers for advertisement and creating very strong imagery for advertisement. And most of these fashion photographers who were very active in magazines, they could see also that there was another work to do, and another way to make a living was working for advertisements. And Edward Steichen, against him, he opened this door also to photography. I just want to show you this also. For me, it's also interesting is that this statement that photography is really the medium of the 20th century, and it was a way to attract many people who put their best in building images. So here, Albert Engerpatch, I wouldn't say he's a fashion photographer, not at all, but just to show you how in photography we can really build very strong imagery. And again, this long tradition of magazines, not just fashion magazine, but the best photographers, really there's a tradition here, worked in, and of course, you know, Life magazine, to hire really people who could know how to build images, who could know how to create very strong photography for the printing page. Edward Steichen, again, I show you the spread here. And also it's very interesting to think that these photographers, because first of all, I showed you just the images, but the layout and building pages and putting together images, it was, of course, a work of artistic directors, designers, working together with photographers. And here you see Cecil Beaton. You know, it's a spread, the left page, the right page. And these photographers, they knew how to create strong images that would work well in this kind of small format, the page of a magazine. And also, what is interesting, to leave space, blank space, for text. And when you had to work for a cover image, you had also to think about how the text can be part of the image. Here another example of very strong, beautiful photography, bathing suit. Summer, of course, you have to sell swimwear, and this is something we'll come back later. And here you see examples starting already in the 1920s about how we can sell swimwear with very strong and beautiful images. And I show you work by Honnigen-Hühne, Horst P. Horst. Here, another way of selling a beauty. We all know about this image by Man Ray. This is part of all the museums. And in a way, it was published in Vogue Paris in 1926 for beauty products, you know, to explain about what you should do with your skin. Other photographers who really were artists and built their career as an artist or wanted to be artists, Man Ray was one of them. Erwin Blumenfeld was also one of them. And because they had to make a living, photography and fashion photography was the best way. So here you see this amazing cover image, 1945, during Second World War, by Erwin Blumenfeld. As you can see, the strength of the graphic design. Another cover here, image cover. So you see that how it is built, also to give space for the text. Another cover, we are in the early 50s, very important one, I'm sure you've seen that one. this amazing face, again, Erwin Blumenfeld. So the history of fashion photography really brings together many important, for me, image makers. And I really consider that these images are much more than just fashion illustrations, much more than documenting fashion. Of course, we all know the work of Avedon. We also know today that, such prints are very high on the market, in the art market. It's interesting to see how suddenly fashion images, left just the world of the printed page and to become something that is much more, and also work of art. Helmut Newton, this German photographer that was very important, had in 2012, 10 years ago or 12 years ago, very important show in Paris at the Grand Palais. That was something really amazing to give to a fashion photographer. Same thing with Irving Penn, the centennial retrospective he had was held in Paris at Grand Palais and at the Metropolitan Museum. So suddenly these temples of art, these, museums like Le Louvre would give shows, important shows to fashion photographers because, again, Helmut Newton, like Irving Penn, they spent 60, 50 years of work just working for magazine, for fashion, working on commission. Fashion is always a commission. It's never a personal work. It's not someone just being alone at home and trying to just make work. It's always to make a living. You get a commission. We tell you what to photograph. We tell you who to photograph, what fashion to photograph. And for me, what was really interesting is to realize that fashion photographers would also, not all of them, but some of them, be recognized in the recent years, I would say in the last 30 years, like proper artists. And even today, it's interesting to go back to very recent works, like here. This is a work by Eric Madigan Eck. I told you about this photographer, American photographer, who I gave him the first museum show. He was 35, something like that. He's quite, if you go online and you look at his Instagram, he has many, many followers. That was a poster of the show, but look at the work we had in the museum. So for me, again, these images that were made for Harper's Bazaar really can stand on the wall of a museum of fine arts. Of Viviane Sasson, I'm sure you know her also. She's one of the contemporary, very good fashion photographer. And again, for me, what is interesting in this new generation, they don't really do a kind of two boxes between the personal work and the commission work. This is what she did for Louis Vuitton a couple of years ago, and this is something very personal. And she just show both in museums, in exhibition, and she sell both in galleries. Here another name, Erwan Frottin, I also gave him a show, and this is a commission made, for a magazine, and it was to just, show a garment. And again, I told you about this show, The New Black Vanguard, I hosted in the museum, and these young photographers, they just, they are 25, 30 years old, and they go to the museum's walls right away. They don't wait. So for me, it's interesting also to think about how some of the images made for magazines, made on commission, how suddenly they have another life when they enter this museum world. I show you a few of, artists I showed in my exhibitions. And again, for me, it's not so much about names, and she's completely unknown, not so well known. Some people are quite well known, like Nick Knight, but for me, these images, it's mostly about the images, about what these images give. It's not about just, celebrities. Although some fashion photographers are really celebrities. But how these images, we want to keep them, how these images are here to stay, and not just something so short in life, because as I said, fashion photography is not here to last. Fashion photography is replaced every month, every week, every day. And some of these images, you just don't forget them. And now these images can have a materiality, a physicality, and this is printed on fabric. Here you see in the middle, there's someone. In a way, it's interesting to see, also to think about outside of the printed page. And this is where I come to Deborah's work after this very long introduction. But I wanted to tell you about, how I approach her work. And because I wanted also to show the materiality, when we are in a museum, we can show the proper prints. And for me, when I started, of course, you can decide, you just look at books, because she produced many books, or look at the magazine and you just turn pages and you look at what she did. But in a way, I wanted to go over that. I wanted to just look at what I could find in these boxes. And in these boxes, we found very odd prints. We found prints that were kind of physical, pins, tapes. We found these kind of collages. And I remember the day when Richard called when we were discussing about the work, and he said, well, I think we found something amazing in these archives. And he showed me, I remember, because I'm in Switzerland and the archives are here in North America. I remember he had his phone and he was, I think, filming these collages. And for me, it was a shock, really, to think about, when you think about a fashion photographer working for the printed page, for magazine, glossy paper, important to remember, and looking at these images, pins on this brown paper. Some of them were really like these tones. It's not black and white photography. It's like monochromic, but kind of sepia prints. I was thinking, wow, there's something unexpected here. And that brought my attention. So I was thinking, who is this artist? Who is this photographer? Who is she, really, Deborah Turbeville? And of course, I realized that the more we dig into her world, the more we dig into her boxes, the less we know about her. This is part of history of fashion photography. Everyone has seen that. And if she would have only done one body of work, this one, she would still be kind of part of history of photography. This is the most well-known image she made when she really started as a Vogue photographer, 1975. This is the image how it was published. It was 8 pages stories in Vogue in the May issue, 1975. And this is how really she started to be a name in photography. So I show you a few of these images. And of course, it's an interesting story because, first of all, this story was, from the beginning, something that were quite shocking in the way that she made her debut. But I would say that if you look into this issue of Vogue, American Vogue, in the same issue you have Helmut Newton, you have the story of O, which was also something quite unconventional, very sexy, very glamorous. Helmut Newton, of course, was this photographer that really played with this sexual body, sexual female body, and it was in the same issue. And in the same issue, I couldn't find it, but there's also a portrait of Richard Avedon of a drag queen. And what is interesting is that many readers complained not just about Helmut Newton, but about the issue and all these photographs. So Helmut Newton, he's a contemporary of Deborah Turbeville. I think it's important to remind what he did. That's in the 1970s. And to go back to Deborah Turbeville, it was a story about swimwear, swimming suits. So this is what she had to do in this story. And to go back to swimwear, because that's what you try to promote in springtime, so the people in summer knows what to wear. Here are a few examples of what other photographers would do. Arthur Elgort, in the 70s, I mean the same period, Helmut Newton here, this Parkinson, I think, Guy Bourdin, and this is Deborah Turbeville. And this is quite interesting because if you think about such a beautiful sky, color image, it's summer, it looks beautiful, or here, this is, what you expect to have in a magazine. And look how different this work is. She had color photography in this issue, but she also convinced the magazine to publish black and white, and you can see a few of these images. And what is interesting is she's not on a beach, she's not on a swimming pool. She really is in this public bath. The title of this series is called The Bath House. It's an abandoned public bath in New York. And it's interesting that she didn't went out, she didn't try to photograph her models in the sun, what we would expect. And for me, it's also very interesting that she got this assignment and she got this freedom. And behind here, there's someone very important, Alexander Lieberman. Alexander Lieberman was a creative director of Vogue, and he kept telling that he discovered Deborah Turbeville. I mean, she started a few years earlier, but that's true that he gave her really a lot, having her in Vogue. Vogue is, one of the most important fashion magazines on an international level. Helmut Newton was a star, a big name at that time. In the same magazine, you have Richard Avedon, the photographer that was really important for Vogue for 60 years was Irving Penn. Alexander Lieberman discovered Irving Penn. And you have young Deborah Turbeville. And he really trusted her and gave her, a way of dealing with fashion photography. So I show you here a few of fashion images she made in the 70s that you can see her style. And it is true that fashion was her way to work, make a living as a photographer. These are a few images that were published over the years, until the years 2000. But to go back to this work, for me, it's also interesting because, in a way, you have something which is part of her work and something that is not part of her work. If I look at that, of course, you see these models. They don't look super happy. They are all in their own world. It's just female models. There are some faces, quite interesting faces. But in a way, it's not so much about her work, what we know about her work, because it's in a way also, it's not a collage, and I'm going to show you all these collages. It's not damaged as she would do later. So in a way, it's kind of conventional, but for her, but unconventional for fashion photography. So how did she come to these works and the project we made for the exhibition and the project we made for the book, Photocollage? I decided to focus on these works that have this materiality, physicality, and these fields of something very specific. And I realized that the same year she published in this Vogue magazine, she created this fake magazine, Maquillage, same year, 1975. And what is interesting is that Deborah Turbeville, before starting working as a fashion photographer, she worked already as in magazines. She was a fashion editor. She had a training in this magazine world, so she knew a lot about the glossy page and fashion magazine, and that's how she started to work. She came in New York very young, and very young she met Diana Vreeland, the very well-known fashion person who was at what point also editor-in-chief at Vogue magazine. She left Vogue magazine for Harper's Bazaar in 1971. That's when Grace Mirabella came in. So when Deborah Turbeville started to work for Vogue, it wasn't Diana Vreeland, but we know that she knew her. She was very much influenced also by her. And in 1975, when she did this kind of fake magazine, and I'm going to show you what we found in the archives at the Muse collection. It's the layout, the dummy of this magazine. And if you look at what she did at that time, it's nothing to do with what we could find in a fashion magazine. And that's, remember what I showed you about Guy Bourdin, about Helmut Newton or Arthur Elgort. This is the layout she wanted for something very personal. So completely the anti-fashion, I would say. Completely opposite of what you would find in a Harper's Bazaar or Vogue magazine. And this is a fictional fashion magazine. She printed 1,000 copies of Maquillage, and she released it at Rizzoli Galleries in New York in an exhibition called Fashion as Fantasy. So we are in 1975. There was an opening for that exhibition. At this opening came Andy Warhol, Paloma Picasso, and Diana Vreeland. So she was very much in this network, and she, being a New Yorker, she knew all these people. And that's very interesting that from her debut, she really already played with these collages, with text, with overlapping images. And these images were kind of damaged. So for me, I really think that we should consider this maquillage as crucial in a practice. Thinking about her work as an artist. So here you can see many of these images. So to go back to the Bathhouse series that was published in Vogue, here you can see in Maquillage, she used a few of these images. And that's also something very interesting, that in her practice, she always goes back to her own work. And this is something that she will constantly do to really work again about works she made as a fashion photographer on commission, and this is part of the Bathhouse series, but how she can revisit her work. So now I'm going to show you what she did in the next years. And you can see that even when she would work for Italy, this is a series, I think she made that for Venice, she would play with these collages and bring together images and really think about how these images can interplay together. And we also see in the 1970s that she started also to work on these experimental techniques of these overexposed, of also overlapping negatives and putting together different images. And for me, this experimental work is very interesting, thinking about photography. Again, think about what Helmut Newton or Guy Bourdin did at that time, about these bright image, color images. And this is, again, completely the opposite of bringing a kind of other atmosphere. And for me, this fictional world, it's not documentary photography, not at all. It's really playing with models, bringing characters in photography, and also experimenting about photography, experimenting about this idea that an image, a photographic image, is also something about a dream or something about a memory, something that we have in mind, and we know, we remember, but it's also kind of disappearing, but it's still part of us. This is what she said about this series. These photographs pose questions you can't answer, but maybe that's the point. And it's true that the more we dig in her work, the more, for me, it's enigmatic. Enigmatic has her characters, enigmatic why she did that, what did she have in mind. This is another work she made in the early 80s in Paris, where she lived at that time. The fact, again, when you look at that place, the staircase, it's again like the bathhouse. It's abandoned, it's kind of strange, not very glamorous, very mysterious again. And, doing a fashion commission, and this is made for Comme des Garçons, and you don't really see the garment, it's also very interesting. And again, this is for me kind of anti-fashion, the way she would create these stories. So here again, that's what she would say about her work. And I like very much this idea of films. It's very cinematographic, I think. It's really about something that, it's like watching a kind of still from a film, and you can imagine a story, or you don't really know what the story is. This experimental process, she will always go and, experiment in, reversing, playing with negatives. This is something that she would do again and again. This is early 80s here in Paris, but that's also what she did when she lived in, when she made work in Russia much later, I would say 15 years later. And again, this is here something she made in Russia. I think it was in the 1990s. But she would have this signature style and this enigmatic, atmospheric work that she would do. And again, if you think about what photography is grasping, catching something that is about the present. It's about now. And in her work, it's the opposite again. It's about the past. It's something that existed, or you think it existed, but it's not there anymore. And I think it's very strong the way she was able to build that impression, that feeling. This is about emotions. And to finish, I want to go back to that body of work that we discovered in the archive, these collages called Passport. So this, it was also interesting because quite confusing for me when we discovered this body of work, because we didn't really know when it was, how it was dated, because she always goes back to older images and she revisits her own archives, and the way she would play with printing processes and the way she would build, going back to old shoots and printing things differently, tearing things apart, putting them together, adding text sometimes, and that's what she did. And Passport is 130 plates we found, and I think now Amanda, I think this is an order that we could find, which is very interesting. Passport, it was a kind of novella, and the first title was Strange Tale Concerning Ivana P., and later becoming Passport Concerning the Disappearance of Alex P. It's also a book, like a story written about the fashion industry. And what I show you here, these are the plates that called Passport. There's a title, as you could see. And Passport tells the story of Alex, a designer who presented a collection at the Paris collection, Paris Fashion Week. And she was under pressure in the industry, and this woman needs really to, she's almost having a breakdown and she needs to have a break, and she escapes. And she goes in a hidden sanatorium. And then from her, she chronicles a mental state in a diary. This series, this novella was never published, and these plates were never published in a book. I don't know personally what she wanted to do. Maybe someone in the room knows. But for me, that's very interesting to discover a kind of such a large body of work, 130 plates together, and she wanted to do something with that. What I wanted to show is that, of course, for me, it's interesting that these collages, and when we discovered Passport, and we think it dates from the early 1990s, in a way, as I wanted to tell you tonight, she started very early on with these collages, the way she worked in the 70s, and she really was able to find a way in her work, very personal way, even when she worked for fashion, and this is something that would be published in a magazine. But Deborah Turbeville, for me, is, as I said, very enigmatic. Much has to be discovered still in her work, and I know that in the archive there are many more things to go in. What I wanted to share with you tonight was just this little path I had in her collages. And my point about making work and making this project is that for me, work, and I hope that's what I wanted to tell tonight, goes much beyond fashion, goes much beyond fashion photography, goes much beyond photography. This is really the work of an artist, and I really want to have her name part of history of art. The show Photocollage is, well, it is a book, and we have the book here tonight, but this is also an exhibition currently touring in Europe. It just opened in Amsterdam. It will be in London later in the year. And if you happen to be in Switzerland, please come and visit us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. So we have time just for a couple of questions. Is there anyone who would like to ask Natalie a question? I see someone back there. Please wait one moment and we'll bring you a microphone.
First of all, thank you for the talk and enlightening us on an incredible artist. And I don't really have a question. It's more an observation that it's really about the silence that's in life when we choose to listen. And there's very much the poetry and an infinite sense to her work. It is so deep, and yet if you can find it, it's there, you know? It's really all I can say. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it makes sense.
Thank you. Absolutely. It makes sense. Absolutely. And I agree with you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Down here.
Hi, thank you so much. This was a great presentation, and I love how you ended with how Deborah's work went over, beyond fashion, and your entire talk touched on that, and especially because I just had the opportunity to assist Dr. Kimberly Wall on developing a course within the fashion program here at the Creative School on reimagining fashion images in a way. So thank you, this was great. I am also just wondering, I'm a Victorianist at heart, how do you feel about the Deborah Turbeville's work and Julia Margaret Cameron's work? Because of course the similarity, especially what we see in the exhibition here as well. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to get your take on that, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Of course, I didn't mention Julia Margaret Cameron, but this was one of the names that she would also mention. And it's interesting, well, I made a point about comparing her work to Edward Steichen because he was a photographer working for fashion and maybe created that path. But of course, if you go back to history of photography, Julia Margaret Cameron, I mean, of course, there's much to say in common. Playing with fictional world, making fictions with photography, bringing characters and making them pose and playing roles, and also this quality in the printing process. And I think that, and we can see that in her work, that she wanted to, bring us to another world, and also to a world that doesn't exist anymore. And of course, if we think about photography, it would be mostly 19th century photography, and she really tried to convey to this kind of another time, another era. And I think you're completely right to mention Julia Margaret Cameron, and she was, I would say, really influenced, maybe. And again, this question of being influential and this idea of getting inspiration, getting inspired, it's very important. And sometimes it's unconscious, sometimes it's conscious in photographers, but they are work that belong to us. So of course, if you think about history of photography, Julia Margaret Cameron would be, I would say, something important. But there's not just Julia Margaret Cameron of photography. There's also literature, cinema, maybe music, I don't know. And all that bring inspiration to artists.
We have time for just one or two more questions. Anybody? Back there?
Thank you for this and for situating her in the context It's really striking to see her in the context of Guy Bourdin and other male photographers. And I'm wondering if, in terms of Deborah's approach, you found commonalities of her approach with Louise Dahl-Wolff, or briefly Lee Miller, or Lillian Bassman, female photographers working in the commercial fashion sphere, selling clothes on women, to women, but also by women.
Thank you for this question. Of course, you mentioned female photographers. First of all, we have to remember that there were not so many female photographers. You just mentioned a few names, but most of the people working in fashion photography were male photographers, and I think it's also important to remember that, because most of these female photographers were surrounded by male photographers, or really. It was about a world, put together by male people, I would say, and history of photography is mostly about male photographers, and it's important today to just recognize, these female photographers. So, but now thinking about the names you mentioned, of course, they are very important for fashion photography, and it's good to remember them. But it's another period. What they would do, or Lillian Bassman, if I think about her, it was about elegance. Fashion was, about this beautiful world that you want to dream about. Beautiful people, beautiful places, glamour and elegance, most of all. I don't think that these words apply to Deborah Turbeville. It's not like it's not about elegance, and somehow maybe her models are elegant women, but I don't think she wanted to create, images about elegance, about beautiful things. I think it's much more emotional. And in that sense, she really has her own way of dealing with photography in that sense.
I'm afraid that we have to end it there. Thank you so much for coming, and I really want to thank you, Nathalie, for your insights tonight about Deborah Turbeville. And now I'd like to mention that Nathalie is going to move downstairs to our galleries, where our exhibition of Deborah Turbeville remains open for another half hour. And we encourage all of you to come down as well. Nathalie will be signing copies of her wonderful book, Deborah Turbeville Collage. So please do come down and also come back to see the show in the future before it closes in early April. Thank you so much for coming.